Today I'm going to be talking about 10 quick tips for mixing drums. Now before I get started, let me specify that I'm talking about live drums, not using any samples. And I'm going to have the drums mixed a little hot so you can hear what I'm talking about. It's not the final mix, but let's go ahead and dig in. Oh, and whoever can figure out how many times I say the word pop in this video wins a prize. All right, back to it. One of the first things you should do, and one of the most important things you should do when you start mixing drums, is check the phase between the different tracks. I know it sounds really basic, but I shall repeat, check the phase. I get sessions sometimes that you would be really surprised, and as a mixer, I can't assume that they got the phase right. Let me show you. So here's a snare drum in phase. Throw it out of phase here. Back in. And you know, sometimes you get a mix and flipping the phase doesn't seem to really do much, or maybe the difference isn't that much. Hey man, don't be afraid to go in there and get that under snare mic, the second mic that's underneath the snare if there's one there, and move it around. I mean, you can see this is lined up pretty good. But dude, I'll get in here, I'll make playlists. You can see I'm on playlist 9 here because I was doing some editing. Don't be afraid to move that bottom snare mic around. And furthermore, I would suggest checking the phase on everything. Sometimes it seems like you've got a really weak or thin tom, when in reality, the mic is just out of phase with the overheads or something like that. I always go and check the phase of the toms before I do any EQ. Overheads as well. I try to get a mix and then I start flipping the phase on the overheads. And you'd be surprised how much of doing that will save you EQ time. So check the phase. One of the issues with mixing drums when you've got a lot of mics is phase. Having more mics can actually, in many cases, make your drums sound smaller because you've got phase issues going on, literally carving out sound from your drum sound. And that just kind of brings to mind toms, because with your toms, they're only hitting once in a while. The rest of the time, they're just sitting there ringing, which sometimes is cool, but often can be a bad thing because of the phase issue, but also sometimes you're just going to get some rumble. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. What I like to do is go through and cut the toms in between their hits, so you're only hearing them right at that moment. So what I'll do is I will go in, I'll solo up my toms, and start getting rid of everything that is in between the hits. I also actually make the sustain a little shorter than most people would think. Usually there's going to be a crash right after a tom fill. You don't really need that much sustain on the tom, but if you leave that in there, that crash is going to be kind of weird. The room mics and the overheads will take care of the rest of the sustain. You throw a little reverb on there, you'll be fine, but you'll get a really nice, tight tom sound. Yeah. So I go through the whole song and I delete all the space between the tom hits and I end up with something that looks like this. You can see right here and here, these are the toms. Now on this particular song, I actually like the sound of leaving the tom tracks on throughout the song, just ringing a little bit in the background. But the problem was that when he would play the fills, it just wouldn't be loud enough. So I didn't want to go through and automate all those volumes and all that. So what I did is I just went ahead and blended it together. As you can see, I've actually got the original toms uncut here because I did like the ring. It was actually supporting the drums. And I've got them cut as well so that they're louder in the mix. Hence, I don't have to deal with so much automation. It's a pretty good process. It's a kind of a compromise between the two techniques. Another tip I have is about using your room mics. In this case, I've got a mono mic, as you can see here. I just use a single mic straight over the kit, but it's basically a room mic. And I was running it into the board really hard, redlining it a little bit. As you can see, it's kind of brick walled, but I kind of like that sound. And it's a particular technique I use where I put the snare straight over the snare drum, about 10 feet up, 11 feet up in the air, and point it straight down. And I distort it. Sounds like a room mic, as you can hear. Here it is without it. I love using room mics. Just helps make the drum sound really big. But the problem with room mics is that, you know, it captures a lot of crash cymbals and extra stuff you don't want. And sometimes, you know, too much of the kick drum, which in certain situations is cool, but for a tighter pop song, it's not great. So you can hear right here, just too much cymbals, you know. This is a kind of pop country song. So I just need to kick a little tighter. So obviously, I'm going to put a gate on it, right? It's going to tighten it up a little bit. And let me show you one of the things I'm doing up here. I triggered the gate off the snare drum. I'm sending a signal from the snare drum to the gate, so the gate opens up, and you hear the room mic when the snare hits, because I want it mostly on the snare drum. And I'm not going to get into this too much right now, because I've got another video about this. You can see this video. Here's a thumbnail. You can see I made a copy of the snare track right here and cut out all the stuff in between so the gate is only seeing the snare. Go check out that video. It goes into this technique way, way, way more deeply than what I can do right here. So anyway, first thing I do is I gate the room mic. So it sounds like this. There it is gated. I'm going to bypass it. Even though I'm gating it, there's still too much cymbal in it, so I filter off a little bit. And then what I like to do is distort it a little bit. I'll add more distortion to this overhead mic. Here's what it sounds like by itself. Here it is with nothing. Now, the thing that's cool about this technique is that it makes the snare drum sound like it's a bigger snare drum than it really is. I'll play it back without the room mic in it. There it is. It sounds good. When I put this sucker in, makes that snare drum pop, and in the mix, really makes that snare drum super beefy. Another thing to remember when mixing drums is automation is your friend. And I do a lot of automation. I'm just going to touch on some basic stuff here. I could get really in depth on this, but let me just give you a couple of the main things that I do when I'm mixing. First off, this is an old trick. When you get to the chorus, on the downbeat of every chorus is to boost up the volume of the kick drum 1 dB. And then when you get to the chorus, there's this little extra oomph on that downbeat. It's subtle, but let me tell you, it can make a difference on making your choruses pop. So I go to each chorus, add that in. Another way to make the chorus pop more is to automate the EQ on the kick drum. So often, like, I want to get a little clickiness on the kick, you know, like when the kick is playing. So you're doing this sort of thing here. I want to get that little click in there. But often it's just too clicky in the verse, but when you get into the chorus and all this other stuff comes in, you want more. So I actually will automate the click. So in the verses, it's lower. So when you get to the chorus, it's higher. Really helps make the kick drum pop. I'll do a similar thing with the snare drum. Over here, you'll see that I am automating. The snare drum just seemed a little too bright, but I needed it to pop more in the chorus. So here in the verse, gets to the chorus. So I cue different sections of the song differently with the drums. It's almost Not like having two different mixes on the drums, but a bit of that because I really want my choruses to pop. Another thing I automate is the reverb. Sometimes I will add a little extra reverb to certain snare hits. So like right here, you know, he's coming out of the verse going into this next chorus and he just hits this one snare drum and I really wanted that to pop. Then it kind of comes back down. Gets to the middle of the verse, there's another one of these little snare hits. And then going into the chorus, I boost the reverb on the snare drum for the snare fills, or for the drum fills. Really can help make the drums pop. So don't be afraid to go in there and mess around with the EQ and make the drums sound more aggressive in the chorus and maybe mellow them out in the verse. Another thing I like to do to make certain sections pop a little bit more is to embellish the cymbals. I'll often add an extra crash cymbal to the downbeat of a chorus. Like here, I'll play it without it. It's subtle, but it can make a difference. Check it out. And then I add it in. And I've actually got that cymbal sample panned a little bit on the other side of the stereo spectrum from where he's actually hitting his regular crash. It just gives it a more, you know, balanced sound and just makes that chorus pop a little bit more. The trick with this thing is to make sure that you're not using too bright of a cymbal sample. I'm actually using something that I recorded a long time ago, a Zildjian that I had I really liked. It's not that bright, but that thing works really good in almost any situation. Low end is a really big deal to me. I want all my mixes and productions to have a huge low end, especially my kick drum. And I can never quite get enough out of a live kick drum. Even using those sub kick things where you got the drum or you hang a speaker out there. I've done that for years. It never is quite what I want. So I started employing a very old school trick where you create a fake sub for your drums. Check it out. Here's the drums just as they sound. Oh, and I should add right now that for you to be able to hear what I'm doing here with this sub, you're going to need to be listening on either a big system or something with a subwoofer or some amazing headphones. Here's the drums without the sub put in. Now I'm going to add it in. Out. I mean, I know it's subtle, but on some big speakers, it'll make a difference. Here's what it is by itself. And what I've done is actually, it's a little tricky. Let me explain. I put a tone generator on an auxiliary return. So this is what's actually going on, and it's tuned to the key of the song. I'm using my frequency chart, which is downloadable from my website at billyhume.net on the downloads page. And then I add a gate on it. This gate is triggered by this track here. So what happens is every time that hits, it opens up the gate. But the cool thing about this technique is you can really fine tune your sub, which you can't really do with one of those sub kick speaker things. I can make it, you can add a little meat to it by putting a little distortion on it. So you got, you know, or short. Or long. Here it is without it. I did a very detailed video about this technique. I'm going to post it up on my YouTube channel. I'll warn you, it's a very old video I did like 10 years ago, so it's not great, but it goes into this whole process in fine detail. Check it out. I'll put a link in the comments. Now, before I get into my next tip here, I think I should explain it a little bit. First off, most of what I'm showing here is more specifically for pop music. It's not like jazz or a jam band or something where inconsistencies and timing and all that is actually part of it. Like in pop music, things are, they're here, they're loud, and it's very competitive. So just kind of keep that in mind. There's all types of music out there. I'm talking more about very competitive commercial music here. Another thing is that when it comes to mixing, some people feel like there's certain lines that you shouldn't cross. Me, I could give a damn. I'm going to do whatever I've got to do to make my mix just huge and pop. And even if that means replaying a keyboard part to get a better sound, or, obviously adding samples in, but I'll even go in there and edit stuff. One of the biggest examples, and one of the things I see that happens a lot is with live drums, is that sometimes the snare drum hits aren't really super consistent. Maybe the drummer hit a little more to the left or the right, so there's not the same kind of pop or not the right attack. I'll go through a mix and find those little spots and replace them with another snare drum from another part of the song to make it strong. Now, I was going to use an example here on this song. Unfortunately, this was done by the great Dave Anthony, and he's so damn consistent and strong. I actually couldn't find any weak snare hits, but let's just pretend I'm going to find one here. So here he is, playing. I do just pounds the drums in a way I like, but let's just say one of these is weak. The thing you've got to do is to make sure that you're getting a snare drum that is happening in the same place relative to crash cymbals and stuff. So let's say coming into this section, so let's say it's like that second snare hit. There was a crash right before. You can't grab any old snare drum. You've got to get something that has a crash right before it. So first off, you want to make sure that you're duplicating your playlist, and you go. And remember, when you're doing this, you can't just replace just the snare track. You got to replace the whole kit. You can't just do the snare because it all goes together. So you got to be able to grab the whole kit, every track. That one's nice and strong. Gonna get right here. What I'll do sometimes, find that peak right there, so I can line it up with the one I'm replacing. Then I come over here where it was weak. So here we go. Crash. Next snare hit. It's a little quieter. I'm gonna get right here. Boom. That's pretty good. Put a little fade here. Pull this out to here. Put a fade there. Boom. And let's listen. It's a good way to get some of those weaker hits stronger, and nobody really needs to know. Of course, I just let that secret out now. Another thing I like to do with drums is to make the reverb pop a little bit more. So here's what I got. I got that nice room sound that's gated. I wanted it to be a little bit bigger, so I added a short reverb. There. But I want to make it pop more, so what I do is I add a little distortion to the reverb. I distort the reverb just a bit. I don't know, I just like that sound. In the mix, it's like this. Let me turn it off. I'm gonna add the distortion. That's just something I like to do, and I actually put distortion on some of my vocal verbs sometimes as well. And then, of course, there's the whole parallel compression trick. Let me show you how that works. So what you do is you take your whole drum kit, and you send all the outputs here to two auxiliary inputs. On one of them, you're going to have just a bare minimum of compression, or no compression, so it'll sound like this. Which is kind of how, the drums are going to sound more or less in reality. Of course, who cares about reality? So this is my compressed track. You can see I'm hitting a lot of compression here, and actually it's more than you realize because I got the release so fast. It's actually, I'm hitting up like, good Lord, like over 18, 20 dB of compression, but a super fast release. When you blend them together, nice, right? Here it is without it. Then in. Makes them really pop. parallel compression is a great way to make the drums really pop. And, you know, it's not really how the drums sounded when you recorded them, but it's how you want them to sound and how we think they should sound. One of the things I rarely see people talk about when it comes to mixing drums or mixing in general is the volume at which you're mixing. I typically mix at a pretty low level. We could actually probably have a conversation at the volume I'm spending most of my time mixing. And I do that for a few reasons. One is because mixing loud is just folly. I mean, everything sounds good loud. You know, when you crank it up, you can really fool yourself, not to mention you're going to ruin your ears and probably your equipment as well. Mixing at a low volume, though, is like if I can make things happen and really just sound like they're kicking ass at a low volume, it's probably going to work just about anywhere. Well, that's it for my 10 quick tips for mixing drums. Like I said before, this is just kind of scratching the surface on some of these subjects. If there's something you'd like to know more about, leave me a comment. Maybe I'll do a more in-depth video about that. And remember to subscribe. Thanks for watching. We are rolling. And now I feel like some kind of kid who takes his heart and lays it on the line. I should have mentioned that the song I was using as a demo today is called Love Letter by Pistol Hill. I'll put some links in the comments.